FM and its management. Attorney Nathaniel Lee, a lawyer with credibility, success, and experience. Representing people in hundreds of jury trials, Nathaniel Lee is who you want by your side in the courtroom. You've seen the rest, now hire the best. Contact Lee, Cosell, and Feigley today. And now, to address the legal concerns of the community, Praise AM 1310, 95.1 FM presents Legally Speaking. Here are
Good morning, everyone. This is Nathaniel Lee. Thank you once again for joining our weekly radio show. We got some significant topics to talk about. I'm joined by the incredible former U.S. Attorney out of Ohio, Marlon Primes, today to talk about some of the significant legal issues today. But the folks that I saw in Kroger and places this week, you wanted me to talk about this big, beautiful bill that we started the conversation on last week. And I agree that we didn't go into details because it was like a 2,000-page bill. So I've been trying to go through it and digest some of the key provisions this week. And so I start off today that the 1,038-page version of the bill that passed the House and the Senate, the number one thing that would do other than cause some chaos in America is that it would balloon the deficit, the United States deficit, by $4 trillion. They did this by extending, in many cases, expanding tax rates for the wealthiest folks in the United States, while at the same time, the cruelty of the bill will deprive about 10 million folks in America of healthcare insurance and regular access to their doctors by taking away, folks, $880 billion from Medicaid. It also increases red tape for the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and allowing other substitute box a million more out of their insurance. So in other words, in Indiana, for example, the governor of our state took away advertisement for health insurance for Medicaid, which is Hoosier Health or Medicaid, or you got different names, but they don't advertise anymore to reduce people from even applying. So the net effect, as bad as it sounds, is as bad as it sounds. That is that we're gonna have people who are gonna be burdened with unnecessary healthcare expenses when they go to the hospital. They won't be afraid. Well, they won't have the funds a lot of time to pay the doctors for doctor visits, much less emergency room visit. The bill is one of the most regressive tax policies we've had in our generation. It will reduce the take-home income of the lowest earners in America by 10%, according to the Congressional Budget Office project. And also, for example, Trump alma mater found that most households earning less than $51,000 will immediately see their after-tax income decrease. Meanwhile, the bill boosts the income of the top 1% of American taxpayers by nearly $70,000 in the first year alone, giving the wealthiest people in America a collective net tax cut of $124 billion. $124 billion tax cut for the wealthiest folks in America, while taking money out of the hands of people who are making a lot less. They used to call this Robin Hood, but I guess it's now Robin Hood in reverse. You steal from the poor and give it to the wealthy. Marlon, this tax policy doesn't make sense to me.
I agree. This is egregious. And the thing that your listeners should understand is that they really do a bait and switch. They provide these little trinkets to make you think that, hey, this is a good thing. And they're hoping people don't read the fine print. For example, there's these Trump accounts. Hey, that's a great thing for someone to get $1,000. But for a newborn, and tax on temps is temporary. But In its place, you have permanent tax cuts that put a huge hole in the deficit. Now, what your listeners should understand is that you remember when President Obama was in office and you had the Tea Party, they were so concerned about the budget. Where are these folks now? I mean, this is a $4 trillion hit to our families. And many of us thought that, some of these movements were disingenuous. And I think we're right, because we don't hear anything from that large group of people that are so concerned about the budget. The second thing that's really important that we need to really drill down in terms of our, your listeners, is that, we do not have a universal healthcare program. All right. It's dependent upon medical insurance provided by your employer. Anybody, whether you're making, 6 figures, 7 figures, you could lose your job or lose your business. Medicaid, basically, the expansion under Obamacare was to have that safety net in case you lost your job. And so what's happening is that they're having this work requirement. It's so onerous in terms of the paperwork that you have to upload things. And if you miss something, even if you have a job, you could result in losing insurance. That's why those estimates are saying that 11 million people are going to lose insurance. Now, in addition, that is going to impact not just an individual person that's losing their Medicaid. It's going to impact all of us if you try to go to the emergency room for a real emergency and people are just going there to get basic care because they do not have insurance. The final thing that I'll say that's important is that because the growing ranks of uninsured, they're going to come to emergency rooms. And if people do not have the money to pay those bills for uninsured care, that's going to be written off as a loss. So that's why you have a lot of hospitals that are going under. So it's going to impact us all, and it's going to result in, increased premiums. So that could be problematic. So you could have a situation where you're going along, you have employer health insurance, and the employer says, hey, it's too expensive. I'm going to switch programs. I'm going to make sure there's huge deductibles. There's a lot of different things that could happen from this bill. So, I just encourage people to read the fine print.
Now, there's one thing that I think most listeners should know is that this provision is an attempt to eradicate democracy itself. And here's why. One of the news stories that we saw on a regular basis dealt with the transportation of the gentleman in Maryland named Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia. They shipped him to El Salvador. And what happened is, as a result, the House of Representatives, unrelated to taxes, put a major roadblock on the court's ability to enforce rules of law. It blocks any funding to enforce contempt of court orders. This in turn could enable the Trump administration to flout the rulings of judges without any consequence. According to Erwin Sherminsky, a professor of law at the University of California, it sounded alarm that this is an affront to the basic function of democracy. He had written articles about this, but the greatest threat to democracy is right in our face right now. They stuck a provision in a tax bill that took away the ability of the federal court to enforce its ruling by contempt. Marlon, this is dictatorship stuff that we're seeing.
It's just deeply troubling. We have, just your outstanding listeners know that we have 3 branches of government. The executive, legislative, and judicial branch are co-equal branches, and they're checks and balances. So the judicial branch, and these are federal judges that are appointed for life. They should have free reign, and that's why there's lifetime appointment. In terms of them interpreting the Constitution, and then you have the structure of the Federal Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. So to basically indicate that a federal judge can't call balls and strikes as he or she sees fit, and then is subject to scrutiny of an appeal, that is certainly problematic. And then we have to also dial back in terms of, what was actually done and really put it into focus. Basically, what happened is you had, federal judges appointed by Democrat and Republican administrations that have indicated that, the president and this administration has acted contrary to existing law, failed to follow, recognized precedent and recognized rules. And they were attempting to hold them in contempt for failing to do so, particularly as it relates to the young man that was shipped to a foreign country. And a judge ordered that he be brought back and provide documentation as to what steps were being taken to bring him back. And the administration pretty much thumbed their nose at those federal judge rulings. So to limit the ability of a federal court to say, hey, if you do not follow my orders or a decision, I'm going to hold you in contempt. And what that means in terms of your audience would be, they can, charge you attorney's fees. They can fine the attorney. They can even direct that, they be placed in jail. And this is a deterrent for individuals, to obey and abide by the law. So if you limit that, it certainly, impacts us all.
Now, listen, here's one of the things that was slipped into the bill that may promote segregation of our school system in America. In the charitable giving side of the Tax Act, the House bill create a backdoor subsidy for private school vouchers. So rich folks who donate to nonprofit that hand out vouchers to private school from kindergarten to 12th grade will now receive not a tax deduction, usually capped at 35 cents of taxes for every dollar donated, but a tax credit. So every dollar donated is counted as dollar paid in taxes. This is tax credit not only applies to the value of cash donation, but the market value of stocks. In many cases, as outlined here, donor will be able to reap a greater return on their investment by donating stocks that has appreciated in value and reaping the tax benefit than by selling the investment and then owing capital gain taxes. The value of this incentive is estimated at $23 billion over 10 years, with the administration subsidizing the flight from public education. At the same time, it aimed to eliminate the Federal Department of Education. So the net result is that during the 60s, Brown versus Board of Education law took a long time effect. So if you're in Florida, where I live, even though the decision was back in 1954, our school didn't start the desegregation process until 1969, 15 years later. And so in response to Brown and school desegregation, the white folks all in our area started their own private schools. So they did not want their students to commingle with Black students. And so the majority of whites band together and started private schools. Now, what this tax bill is doing is that it's revisiting the past. By increasing the money available to rich people, you're promoting segregated school system at the exclusion of public schools. So we're seeing open policy that's designed to promote segregation in our school system, in my opinion. So this is a terrible, terrible thing because we made a significant amount of racial progress in America, and we're seeing these tax bills that apparently attempted to change that. And so I'm concerned because most people won't know until they see the results. Now, the results of this, you won't see immediately, but over a decade, it'll be a slowly rescission of funding for your public schools because the private school students will be paid for by wealthy folks. And so I'm concerned about that. We see this blatant attack on diversity, inclusion, affirmative action, the rights of African Americans sued for discrimination, and now this. Marlon, this is terrible policy.
Yeah, I agree. And, and I know a number of your, listeners are frustrated, in terms of some of our public schools and, that, the graduation rate, the attrition rate are high. But, I really invite you all to look at the statistics in your state in terms of these, these private for-profit schools. A number of them, not all, but a number of them have worse rates than your public school system. And, so we have to be careful about turning over our public education system and there be no accountability. That same scrutiny that you need to apply to public schools, you certainly need to provide that to these for-profit schools as well. So I get it that a lot of people, even in Ohio, I'm sure in Indiana, there's some frustration, but the public education system, K through 12, is one of our shining lights in our American democracy. Many countries do not have that compulsory school from kindergarten to 12th grade, and we're eroding that. And that's going to have devastating consequences, on our economy and on our future. So I think your listeners need to really look at the fine print, really look at these schools that your good hard-earned tax money is going towards, and a lot of times their results are worse. So I think that we just really need to pay attention to details, hold our public schools accountable, but making sure we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and just giving this money to schools that may have worse results.
Now, there's one other thing about this bill that is despicable that I don't think most people even thought about this. That is that the tax bill contains some animosity to immigrants. And it limits the availability of the child tax credit only to citizens of children that their parents are citizens of the United States. The child tax credit is only available under this bill for folks, the parents with social security numbers. So immigrants who pay taxes, about almost $100 billion a year in taxes, illegal immigrants. So they fund your social security, they help fund the government, but they receive no benefit. But this bill is just cruel. What it does is that the immigrants who pay into the system for their same as you do for social security and things like that, they can't get any benefits. So the bill requires that in order to get benefits, that their parents must have a social security number, which they don't have. So it would increase the value of the tax credit to $2,500, but require that the parents claiming the credit have social security cards as a proxy for citizenship status. So in other words, you get disqualified even though you're illegal immigrant paying taxes. They have their own tax number by the IRS, but they don't have the ability to get a social security number. They will pay the taxes, but when they're filing their tax return, they can't get the tax credit. Very important. So they're increasing the tax burden on illegal immigrants without any benefits. And so what's the problem with that? Well, folks, our fruits, our vegetable, dairy, all the jobs that immigrants are doing in your community, your state, your city, they're making less wages. And so just say hypothetically that every illegal immigrant, what, the 14 million or so, are decide to say, okay, effective September 1st, we ain't gonna show up for work. So what would happen to the national economy? We lose everything that we consume for the most part in terms of food intake, from dairy to agriculture, fruits, vegetables, is done by illegal immigrants. So all of a sudden, if those folks say, the heck with this, we're not gonna go to work, what do you think will happen to our national economy? As a practical matter, we would then have to rely on countries such as Mexico to provide our meat, our produce, our fruits, vegetables. And then we have the administration impose these draconian tariffs. So we have a shortage of supplies of these goods. Now follow this, because right now we can export because we produce so many. But if we don't have people out there picking tomatoes in the field, strawberries, or these different products, they're not being done in America, the fields will go rotten. And so I hate to make this dire prediction, but this idea of attack on these immigrants ultimately going to result in a backlash. Now, ultimately, it got to have a significant effect on inflation, because now we're seeing the early signs that we're seeing is showing that the workers are not showing up. But the workers not showing up does not appear to be a national organized effort. So in other words, the most ignorant thing about this government is that America's, particularly the MAGA Republicans, think that illegal immigrants get tax benefit. Folks, that is so wrong. During the pandemic, Marlon and our listeners, in America, because people were dying every day, we had a failed policy by the Trump administration in terms of dealing with the pandemic. Now, it's very important. The illegal immigrants could not get unemployment benefits. They could not get the government benefits that America was given. Why? Because you had to have a Social Security number and file a tax return. And the immigrants, even though they paid into the system, they couldn't get in those benefits. And so the biggest misconception for the MAGA Republican is that somehow illegal immigrants get benefits for the government. The benefit they were able to get up until now would have been Medicaid. See, because everybody would qualify for Medicaid before this bill. So, but the Medicaid is something that they also pay for. And so that ability to go to hospital to be treated is being taken away. And so this policy is worse than most people think, because now we have sick people that will be unable to obtain medical, not just illegal immigrant, but regular Americans. Bad policy, Marlon.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that one of the things that your listeners should understand and probably familiar with the old adage that a smart person learns from their own mistakes, a wise person learns from other people's mistakes, and for our people and your listeners, it's just so important to really understand how the immigration issue was framed. It was framed during the election that we're only going to, deport, those that have engaged in violent crime. And unfortunately, many of our Hispanic brothers and sisters bought that hook, line, and sinker. Come to find out, less than a year in this administration, that's not true. There have been people that, have been here for years and are now being deported. Many Cuban Americans in South Florida thought they were exempt are now being deported. So, I think we want to use that as a cautionary tale to read the fine print. Really, find out the facts for yourself. Just don't listen to one medium. Really get down to the basic. Listen to a podcast, or information that on this show to get the facts so that you're truly informed. Because I'm seeing that in our community as well. There's just a lot of misinformation. You see people online that look like you and I that are saying, "Hey, this is a wonderful bill." And because they haven't read the fine print. So let's just not fall into that mistake. And the final thing I'll say is that, we have to understand that, it's not in our best interest for immigrants to be in the shadows and, be afraid to get, health care or go to an emergency room or get education. Okay, so the impact, if they decide, well, hey, I'm really sick and I'm not going to go to the hospital, hey, that's how pandemics start. I mean, right now we have some of the largest outbreaks of, diseases that are really controllable. Measles, chicken pox, and think of what, then we just had a pandemic regarding COVID. So anybody who's sick, irrespective of their status. We want them not to be in the shadows, but go and get the proper treatment so that we, are not adversely impacted as a community. And we don't want people in the shadows not getting an education, because it impacts us all. We want them going to, our K through 12 schools. We want them going to, college, so they can be productive members of society and on a pathway to citizenship. So again, we need to learn from the mistakes. And, and I'll say this, there's some people call it funny, some people call it ironic that, they were, Hispanic Americans, our brown brothers and sisters. And they have one lady that was, singing this song, we love Donald Trump and we're going to vote Donald Trump. And then, now she's crying because her family and friends have got deported because they haven't read the fine print. So if you do anything, listeners out there, listen to this show, find a good newspaper that you can rely upon, do independent research. So you're not in a situation where, there's a bait and switch, where you think you're voting for something, it's entirely different.
Okay, we'll go to the lines here. Imhotep, we got a question coming for us today. Have you been reading this big, beautiful, ugly bill?
Yes, sir. Brother Nate, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, sir.
All right, good. Yes, that that big, beautiful, ugly bill. It is definitely ugly. It's beyond reproach. We had a staff meeting this week at my employer. I work at one of the major hospitals in the city. Everybody listening in Indianapolis, and it was a staff meeting this week. I was off that day, but I did get the minutes of it. And according to some of the higher management, that they expect layoffs to come probably December, January. The word is that some of the effects, some pullback, some cuts are already affecting reimbursement. Then I read a bill. Then I read a forecast yesterday from Fortune magazine that they expect private insurance rates and people with the Affordable Care Act, other known as Obamacare, to go up between 15 and 26%. It's thoroughly ridiculous. It was something that didn't need to. Man, did he even go to Wharton Business School? That's the rumor. We know your dad did and all that stuff like that. Wharton ought to be ashamed of himself. I wouldn't blame him.
I got something that worse, Imhotep. This is critical. This is the part that I think is just utterly cruel. Okay, part of this new requirement they added to add insult to poor folks and disabled folks is that they added a work requirement of 80 hours a month of work, right? Now, here's the problem. If you're handicapped, you've had a stroke, like I've had many Americans, and you can't walk, you're in a wheelchair. And so how do they expect you to work if you're disabled? So now you have to have these maze of forms that people have to fill out that going to require a certain level of sophistication. They're going to be kicked out. So they have people kicked off of Medicaid that are disabled and not able to meet all the requirements. And this is ludicrous. There's always been an eligibility requirement for reduced government benefits. Everybody knows that. Now they're saying that you have to have work or volunteer requirements, even though you're disabled. You wouldn't be, a lot of people are poor not because they want to be poor, they're poor because of their circumstances most of the time. They can have health issues, they can have all sorts of issues that cause them to be in need. And so the people that are most in need, they're saying to hell with them. You need to work, otherwise, you won't have this benefit. That's, I think, is cruel.
It is cruel, and here's the caveat that what is it, 40% or 35% of the people on Medicaid are children, first of all, so under school, because they keep pushing this narrative that 35-year-old men, 35-year-old men are sitting at home in the basement playing video games on Medicaid, and that's not the case. I've been doing this 30 years. Most of your people that come in, there are plenty of people, even let's say in addiction and recovery. A lot of those people work. They work, they have, and they barely can work because, of course, we know if they've had a criminal arrest or something like that, they get problems getting employment. But those that may be able to find employment, they do work, and that means they're paying taxes back into the very system that they're gaining from. It's really crazy to push this narrative that 35-year-old men are sitting at home playing video games getting Medicaid. That's not the case. And then also, Christine Noem talked about, well, we're going to take the people on Medicaid and come work these farms and all these farms where everything is all the immigrants have quit. Where? What are you talking about? First of all, where are you getting them from? How are you going to get them there? What are you talking about? It's idiocy what we're hearing from them. But I got one for your guest. Really disturbed me. Brother Nate, I'm sure, is familiar with this. I wasn't happy with this week. Governor Braun signed off on all of the DEI cuts, and now it's being returned in the state of Indiana. Merit, excellence, innovation. First of all, merit is subjective. What I think, I'm a coach. I've been coaching for 20 years. I'm kind of a taskmaster when it comes to the sport. But what I may think may be meritorious may not be for someone else, and it could be vice versa. So that's one thing. Excellence. I mean, we don't have a problem with excellence. We have a problem with fairness and equality. And the innovation, well, China is leading us in innovation because China is investing in their people. They're investing back in their corporations. They're investing back in their educational structures, whereas you just talked about the lack of investment and the problems that they're doing now. Then they just freed up $1 billion for the public school yesterday. They just freed that. That money's late. The people running the school system needed that money in May so they can already have it together. Well, they held that money up until yesterday. So now they're behind the ball. This country doesn't want to invest in its people. It's xenophobic in nature, and that's from the white male. His idea of things is like he's the only one that has a look. And I'll leave you with this. If you don't believe that, look at what the president of Brazil yesterday said about Trump. He said, first, because remember, they got the trial of the former president going on, and Trump slapped those tariffs on him just because of that trial, which is thoroughly wrong, okay, because we have a trade surplus with Brazil. But the president of Brazil said, Donald Trump thinks he is the king of the world, and he's not, and we're not going to let him do it. So they took away the social media contact and everything from the former president they have on trial, and now all of a sudden Rubio has barred the president of Brazil from coming into the United States, took away his visa. And then you speak on that too. They added a $250 payment to the visa. People coming in on visas, I guess they can't get around it. Some $250 now added to get a visa to come into America. Canadians came into America and powered this country at $20 to $30 billion visiting. Now they're not coming. So it's thoroughly ridiculous. I know
there's something else that you missed about the governor this week that was thoroughly insulting.
I'm sorry. I want to get back. No. Can I get back to that, Nate, real fast? He came to the governor thing at the Black Expo. Now, I'm an old Malcolm X, Wallace D. Muhammad disciple. I try never to speak against my own people, no matter what, because you're supposed to support your own, even when they're wrong in the face of white supremacy. But I didn't like the stuff I read from the Citizens Independent paper that had interviews from the president of Black Expo, Watson, and others. You had the governor there. Basically, she's saying she hoped we can get away from these acronyms, DEI, MEI, and just judge people on their merits. They didn't press him on any of this like that. It's in Citizens, it's the Citizens Independent. It was a great piece. I'm really disturbed about it. I'm going to mention on Cameron's show tomorrow. I don't like the fact that they had this man there, and they didn't press him on these issues. They basically kowtowed to him. According to this piece, they kowtowed to him. And I didn't like that, Nate. I'll listen to you.
Well, the biggest problem I had, so you know, is that we've had an outbreak of teen shooting and violence in our community. And it's fueled by guns. And it was a Republican that passed these gun laws that allows access to guns without permits or background check. So the problem that they created,
really,
guns are not made in our community, they're shipped in, and they've have laws to allow everybody to get guns. And now they're criticizing the effect of their legislation and blaming the city when in fact state law, these draconian gun laws that they passed allow anyone to get guns, I think is stupid. The net result is that they made it accessible to everybody. Everybody now got guns. There's no gun permit, no background check, so you get a gun. And the net effect is that you have more violence because of the legislation. In the past, if you had the ability to take guns out of the hands of everybody and only people that had background checks, it was a safer environment. So the criticism they're given is one that they created. Now, next caller, George Avery, you had a question or comment for us today about this issue. Go ahead. You're on mute. Caller. Hello. Okay. While the caller unmute, Marlon, the other thing about this bill that I also thought was cruel was the work requirement for the food stamp program. The federal food stamp is called SNAP, right? And the bill would expand work requirement for adults up to age 65. The current work requirement phased out at 55. It would also require parents with children as young as 8 years old to work outside the house, turning another generation of young, poor children into latchkey kids. Now, according to the Urban League, the big, beautiful, ugly bill would richly reward billionaires and their heirs, would be financed in part by taking food out of the mouth of hungry families and children. It's estimated as many as 2.7 million households would lose food benefit, with the average blow to the family grocery budget totaling about $254 per month. So that's the big ugly bill summary today. And as I read more legislation that get my attention, the more upset I get, because it's such an unfair bill to reward people who are the wealthiest folks in America at the detriment of poor folks. And
yeah, I think you're good.
Go ahead.
I think you're absolutely right. But I want to put a fine print, point on this, is that, hey, there is nothing wrong with saying, hey, people should work. I think you should. But the problem with this bill is that our government systems are so antiquated that the requirements are so onerous. You could have a job, and if you try to upload, documents verifying your work and you miss something, then you could lose important food stamp benefits. And a lot of people that get the food stamps, or SNAP as they're called now, are in fact working. So we got to be very, very careful about this. And then the other thing we want to look at. You want to look
my
at
whole name, Joyce Avery. Mute me again. What are y'all doing?
Ahead.
Hello? Can you hear me, Nate?
Yes.
Oh, wow. This is Joyce. That I don't know how I was muted last time, but I have questions on the health care. Like when COVID occurred, I retired from the government, and I have government health care. I realized I was too young to draw any kind of, so I went to Anthem. Anthem put me on that, they went, once they cut the work, and we had to work from home, which I never agreed to, but this is what was instilled. Then they initiated health care. I don't even get sick here, Nate, and I have much insurance. So they initiated something. This Medicaid is a joke. Y'all double dipping. That's my opinion on the double dipping. I mean, you got a job, they generally, can you still hear me, Nate?
Yeah, but what's your question, Ms. Avery? What's your question?
My point is that there is discrepancy or something, y'all, hey, not you personally, don't get it twisted. Even though I've dealt with you in the past, I mean, Local 481, I'm noticing some discrepancies there because, yeah, that kind of stuff. But when I went to Anthem, they must have worked something. Anyway, they've been worrying me. I'm on a do not call list. I get calls 8 to 9 times a day. Do you not know about NAMI for the mentally insecure individuals? Have you not heard of NAMI? Have you?
Well, thanks for your question, but what you probably need to do what you probably need to do is block it. Thank you for calling, but you probably need to block the callers. But in any event, Pierre Pullins, you have a question or comment for us today, sir?
Oh,
go ahead.
Good morning, Nate and Attorney Primes. Can you hear me good?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah, Nate. Wanted to bring the topic home to a local legal issue. As you know, I do a lot of pro se work for myself because I can't find a lawyer such as yourself and other big name attorneys here in town. But I had to ask the court recently for one of our esteemed judges to recuse herself from my court case, Sarah Barker. And I got the case plastered on my Facebook. I want you and all the other local attorneys in town just to know about that case because I want you to see how these courts allow big law firms like Littler and how they help them out in litigation. That's how these guys are able to do what they do. And I just wanted to put it in your knowledge base and Attorney Prime's knowledge base. I just want you guys to familiarize yourself with my case and just have it in your mindset and just know about it. Because I think when you've got federal judges, in my opinion, that's my opinion, helping out these other big corporations in litigation against the pro se litigant, that's not fair. And I'm not going to take up your time anymore. I just wanted you and Attorney Primes to know about that. It's plastered on my Facebook, Pierre Pullins versus EchoBot. EchoBot is formerly RSR Tomeko. Really interesting case, Nate. It was a failure to hire because of age discrimination. And I tell you, I can't believe this stuff is still going on, but it's very difficult for citizens like myself to find even attorneys that take cases like those on contingency fee basis. People don't like running up in those courts.
Well, here's the problem. Like, we do specialized practice over the years. Mm-hmm. As a young lawyer, we had a general practice. Now I do wrongful death, significant injury cases have a certain value. And we don't do every category of case. Like, we don't do criminal law, we don't do domestic relations. So most of the consumer-based things, the reason being, Pierre, the cost of litigation is out of control. My early days of practice, I've done 190 jury trials, and luckily we were able to win these cases. But what happens is, I used to try a case for $4,000 or $5,000. Those verdicts I got all over $1 million, I'd spend between $50,000 to $75,000 to put the case on at trial. And so with that type of outlay when you're doing case on a continued fee basis, you had to win the cases, but you had to win them big to make a profit. So if you have a case, if you're going to spend $50,000 to $75,000 and only work for a couple $100,000, you can't do it. And that's what has happened to litigation. One of the cases we did, a products case, I discovered that the defense attorney charged up to the trial was $2.5 million. And so when you're doing these cases, they're getting paid a lot of money, up to $3,000 an hour. Those lawyers' fees are pretty high. And so when you think that the judge being biased, like in that judge, for example, I've won every case in my career in Judge Barker Court, because ultimately she followed rules of evidence. And if you don't know the technical rules, you're going to lose a case in that court because the judge follows technical rules. If you don't know them, you're at a disadvantage.
Well, to that point, Nate, when you talked about litigation costs and what those lawyers charge, and that was one of the reasons why I asked for recusal. And the magistrate is handling the case, but my thing is, it appeared to me that they were helping these guys litigate this case beyond. I mean, it's just like they were throwing them litigation hours. I mean, it's crazy, but it's not crazy because you two are in the game. You see this stuff every day. The average citizen doesn't see this stuff. So I just want you guys to check out what I said, and I'm concerned about my liberty and my freedom because she's denied the motion to recuse herself.
Well, they're not going to recuse herself, but Pierre, one final thought process. Let me give you an update on something. In 2023, when Randall Taylor was chief, in 3 months, we had 18 black guys shot by police officers in the city. Now, during that time period, I did not see the public outrage. You know, one guy shot in the backyard, another guy shot in a tree, you know, just people just being shot, right? With no accountability. Now, we're litigating 2 of those cases. So what you're talking about, like on the defense side, every week, the defense lawyers send us an email. They want this, they want that. So it's a proactive litigation that takes a significant amount of time, right? So, but we're going to take the case to trial and we're going to win the case at trial. But until then, we're going to spend 1,000 man hours because each of the police officers involved, we do a full 8-hour deposition. That's going to cost $3,000 to $4,000 to videotape it in the transcript for the single deposition. And that's how we have to upfront all these exorbitant costs in order to win the case. And then every week you have to deal with them complaining about something. You have to deal with the lawyers on the other side. They're running up their bill. They're making thousands of dollars every week by sending emails and meetings and things like that. And that's kind of the way the litigation process works now. So what you think is biased is just the way things are now. It's a different litigation cycle we're dealing with. And so when you have a case like that, the reason you have difficulty hiring lawyers is because, one, they want money up front on a case like that. We do cases on a contingent fee basis, but we don't do those type cases.
Right. Well, just keep an eye on me, Nate.
Okay, I will, man.
Because
well, thanks for calling in, Pierre. Thank you, man. Take care now. Now, hey, Marlon, we had another issue that you're an expert in this field. You had a lawyer fired from the Justice Department that worked on the Trump case that Jeff Epstein. Explain this process. How in the hell does the U.S. attorney just fire a lawyer? I've never heard that before. What's going on?
It's unprecedented. It's really disturbing. You know, I think, you know, your listeners should understand it's, you know, Attorney Comey, the daughter of the former FBI director. But irrespective of where you sit, everybody should be treated fairly. And what the precedent basically is that if you want to fire a federal employee, you can do so, but you have to follow procedural steps. Number one, you have to provide a notice of intent to terminate. Then you give that individual an opportunity to respond. There's an independent third party at the agency that makes a decision based upon your response as to whether or not the termination is going to go through. And then there's a final decision as it relates to that, you know, proposed termination. And then you have a right to appeal it to the Merit System Protection Board. And the reason why this is done is that we do not want you know, these prosecutors that have tremendous power. They have the power to charge people with crimes, change the course of their lives, file tax liens. We want to make sure that we have an experienced workforce. We don't want people, to be ousted just because, the president, doesn't like their father or something arbitrary. We need to make sure people have due process. Now, the other problem that, the administration is not looking at is that, hey, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I mean, if these are the rules, what's going to happen when a Democratic administration comes in? And it's just going to be a vicious cycle. They're going to start terminating people. So, I mean, I think that we need to really default to the Civil Service Reform Act and all those reforms that we've talked about in previous shows to make sure that we have an experienced and non-biased and non-political workforce. You have to be very, very careful about that. And then we have the Hatch Act that prohibits federal employees from kind of engaging in various types of political activities, because we want to make sure that our public has confidence. And this just doesn't instill confidence. And I was talking to some of my former colleagues, and just the things that they're kind of dealing with, they're getting emails at all hours of the day from the Attorney General. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't put he, him, or they designation. You can't say anything critical about the administration on your own private social media. So there's a lot of norms that are being thrown out the window that are really a clear and present danger.
Well, I don't understand this, though. This prosecutor that they fired worked on the Jeffrey Epstein case and the Sean Diddy Combs case. But what I don't understand, the MAGA media is having a conniption about the release of the Epstein file. And each day, my reels are populated, I guess, by the Elon Musk group, and they show videos of the current president with these young girls. And, every day I get these junk videos, and it's being released publicly. And it's somewhat disturbing because it looked like these girls are 13, 14, and 15 years old. And you got these grown men with these children. And it's disturbing to me. And I was thinking about that. So now they're saying they're going to release these records, but they're going to sanitize them and have the FBI agent take out anything they're referring to the current president. And so it just seemed an oddity to me that the person who prosecuted Epstein, that would have access to these files that are not publicly shown, and now that person is kicked out of the Department of Justice, Marlon. It's almost seemed like this is a political maneuver versus anything to do with substance. I don't know whether or not there was a good or bad lawyer. I have no idea. But the process to me is disturbing, quite frankly.
It really is. Now, I think that, she made some critical errors in terms of the, P. Diddy Combs case. I mean, she didn't listen to what the court was saying. The court, if many of your listeners recall, basically told her at the beginning of the trial, hey, I don't see the coercion. That is the issue. And she just ignored that. But irrespective of that, a person should receive due process. And it's a clear and present danger to our public if, prosecutors that have so much power aren't given, due process. Now, the other thing I think you have to be very, very careful of is, releasing grand jury material, because a grand jury, you can have hearsay evidence, you can have anything that's before the grand jury, because they determine whether or not someone is going to be, officially indicted or accused of a crime. So it can be double hearsay, triple hearsay. There could be no attorneys present on the other side. So you got to be very, very careful, when you release that information. It's a reason there's a federal law to say this information is confidential and can't be released, because we don't want somebody's reputation tarnished if it turns out there's not enough evidence. So by all accounts, Epstein is a terrible person, but we have to look at what the overall impact of releasing, 9E or grand jury material. I think they should get to the bottom of it, but I think we need to make sure that our constitutional rights are protected, because, hey, one day it's Epstein, one day it might be you or me. So there should be, severe restrictions on releasing grand jury material, in my view.
Well, one final thought process about this. How rare is it for the federal courts to release grand jury transcript? I don't recall seeing that before. Is that something that occurs on a regular basis? I've just
No,
never seen that.
no, they really don't. They really guard that closely. There's an old adage that a prosecutor that can indict a ham sandwich, that you've heard, because the prosecutors are the only person that are in the room during the grand jury process. They can present all type of evidence that is very one-sided. All right. So as a result of that, there are a number of instances where the grand jury says, hey, there's not enough evidence to indict. In those situations, we don't want all that information out in the public sphere, where there's not enough evidence by the grand jury of your peers that said that the case shouldn't go forward. So that information is very guarded. Lawyers can lose their license if they, leak that information. And it has happened to some U.S. attorneys' offices that have leaked grand jury material. So you got to guard that, very, very heavily, in my view. Now, in this case, we've had an indictment and a conviction, and there should be evidence, so the public understands the case. I think that should be released. There should be, release of information regarding the suicide. All that information, to me, should be, out in the public so that people, understand what happened.
Well, thank you very much for your comments and for all the folks that listen in. Next Saturday, we're going to be broadcasting from Chicago at the National Bar Convention as they celebrate 100 years in existence. So come join us next Saturday as we deal with important legal issues of the day. And thank you, my superstar panel, Mario Primes today, and all the callers that call in. And also for the folks in Indianapolis, we had a great time last night at the outdoor music presentation. And today, make sure you visit Black Expo, historic summer celebration in Indianapolis is buzzing right now. We have the WNBA All-Star. So come downtown to the convention center today and enjoy it. It's free. Take care, everybody. I'll talk to you next Saturday.